This was generated from a physically realistic scene. So here we're trying to evolve object manipulation. We've heard a lot about that today. These are what the random solutions look like. On a standard PC, the solutions start to look like this after a while. The robot is learning how to grasp this object. This is the solution after about 8 hours. We tend to run these overnight. You can see it's now learned to grasp and lift objects of different shape and grasp them and manipulate them in different ways. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But that's just to give you a feel for what these experiments look like. Okay, Rolf mentioned the Resilient Machines project. This was something that was conducted together with Hod Lipson and Viktor Zykov at Cornell University. I'm not going to talk in too much detail about this work today. Most of what I'm going to talk about deals with simulated robots. And the idea here in the Resilient Machines project was to evolve behaviors in simulation, transfer them to reality. Here you're watching a successful transferal, but the vast majority of these transferals are unsuccessful. The idea is the difference between what the simulation expected and what the physical robot actually did is fed back into an evolutionary process which tunes the simulation to reflect physical reality. So here our physical robot has been damaged, part of its leg is missing. The algorithm has inferred that there's been a topological change in the robot's morphology. It's now made up of 3.5 legs compared to 4. It has to come up with a qualitatively different gait and then carry it out on the real machine, okay? So this is just one method of transferring behaviors between simulation and reality. There's some other methods that are out there. So we're just going to assume from here on out, I'm going to show you some simulated machines, but that we can somehow transfer what we evolve into reality. Okay, so why does morphology matter? I want to just walk you through some reasoning first, and then I'll show you some concrete results why I think morphology matters. If you ask somebody who studies animal behavior, if you ask an ethologist how you should go about studying an animal, they'll answer, of course, you need to understand something about its brain, body, and environment in which it evolved and lives. So of course, if we want to try and replicate behaviors that we see in biology, like legged locomotion, then of course we also have to consider not only the robot's control policy, but also its body and task environment, right? That's the standard embodied cognition stance. Most of us would agree with that so far. Most roboticists would agree with that. The question, of course, is it follows then, if we're trying to realize a particular behavior like legged locomotion, what is the most appropriate body plan or body plans for that task? If we're interested in legged locomotion in a certain environment, should we be creating a hexapod, a quadruped, a biped, a humanoid, right? There's a whole number of questions we can start to ask about what is the appropriate body plan. Usually we're trying to replicate some behavior that we've observed in nature, so obviously we start by trying to replicate aspects of the animal's body plan. So if we're interested in legged locomotion, we might try and replicate the dynamics and the structure and the material properties of that animal's legs. But what about the spine? Do we create an active spine, a rigid spine, a passive spine with compliance? The questions about the body plan obviously start to multiply without end. So which details of the body plan are we going to try and implement in our robot, and which ones are we going to ignore? Right? If we're building a biologically inspired robot, it is by necessity a physical model of that animal. We're going to have to ignore some details. But what details to ignore and which to include? It's a difficult question to answer. There's another complicating observation, which, as we've heard a lot about today, of course, the adult animal or the organism that we're interested in, especially if it's a human, is not an animal that's fixed in time. It's the end product of a developmental change. That might be postnatal development from the infant to the adult form. We might also be interested in the prenatal development. How did the embryo grow into the infant? And of course, that developmental progression itself is the end product of an evolutionary trajectory. If we look over the evolution of terrestrial organisms, they have increasingly complex ontogenetic processes leading up to humans that have a very long development time. So that observation leads to another kind of question, which is, what are we trying to replicate? Are we trying to replicate the end form? Are we trying to build a humanoid robot, in which case are we just going to focus on the adult form of the human body? Or instead, perhaps we want to try and replicate the developmental process. So as you're all aware, there's a large